Today on Historia Gaia.
10 historical prophecies that actually came true. Some humans are gifted as they have an insight which astounds everyone if it ever comes true. Some of the major disasters in the world were predicted by people in the past which actually came true, thus baffling the minds of the people who were not much into clairvoyance and prophecies. Today, on Historia Gaia, we would look into 10 of such events.
10. RMS Titanic disaster. In 1898, an American author named Morgan Robertson published a novella titled As Futility or the Wreck of the Titan, in which he predicted the disaster of RMS Titanic. The novella told a fictional story of an ocean liner named SS Titan, which sinks in the North Atlantic Ocean after hitting into an iceberg. 14 years later, in 1912, the events of his book were mirrored almost exactly with sinking of Titanic, which perished 1,503 people with it. What the intriguing fact is that the list of similarities between the fictional Titan and the real Titanic is amazingly wide-ranging. Titan was described to have had the same size and speed as Titanic, both were deemed unsinkable, both had a dangerously less number of lifeboats on board, both sank in April, and both lost more than half of the passengers and crew. Even the names sound similar. Surprisingly, Robertson wrote the book years before the actual disaster, so how could he predict it so incisively? Though he denied all the indictments of clairvoyance, stating that the similarities were merely a coincidence and a result of his knowledge on shipbuilding and maritime trends due to his father being a ship captain, it still blows a person's mind off. 9. Wi-Fi. Nikola Tesla, a Serbian-American inventor and engineer, often nicknamed as the man who invented 20th century. He is best known for the contribution towards the modern electrical supply system. Another amazing thing he did was that he predicted Wi-Fi in 1901. While in an interview with the New York Times, he discussed his predictions on the future technology and said, "It will soon be possible to transmit wireless messages all over the world so simply that any individual can carry and operate his own apparatus." And surely by apparatus he meant mobile phone, which is also shocking because the first mobile phone wasn't created until 1973 and Wi-Fi wasn't introduced until 1991. He also kind of foresaw the invention of Skype and video calling in 1926, as in another interview he stated, "Through television and telephony, we shall see and hear one another as perfectly as though we were face to face, despite intervening distances of thousands of miles." Indeed, a mega genius. There is a memorial statue of Tesla in San Francisco which emits free Wi-Fi for the visitors, appropriate enough. 8. Organ transplants. Robert Boyle, a critically influential scientist known for Boyle's law and referred as father of modern chemistry, made a prediction related to biology. He was a person known for being way ahead of his time. In the 1660s, he made a wish list in his journal explicitly mentioning that in the future, medicine will see the cure of diseases by transplantation, a notion which was never thought of at that time. Over 300 years after his staggering prediction, the first kidney transplant took place, which was successful. Since then, this procedure has grown common all over the world and has been saving lives. For instance, in 2014, around 17,107 kidney transplants took place in the US alone. He didn't just write about transplants. His mysteriously correct journal also had mentions about submarines, psychedelic drugs, genetically modified crops, GPS, airplanes, and prolongation of life. 7. Atomic bomb. H. G. Wells, an acclaimed author known for War of the Worlds and the Time Machine, predicted the atomic bomb. On the verge of World War II, most people couldn't even imagine the destruction caused by an atomic bomb when H.G. Wells, in his novel The World Set Free, he described a uranium-based hand grenade that would continue to explode indefinitely. Wells wasn't much of a science guy, with a very little or no knowledge about the radioactive elements, and would have no way of knowing that it would actually be possible to weaponize atomic power in future. The first project which initialized making an atomic bomb started 28 years after Wells' book was published. 6. The Wall Street crash. Edgar Cayce was an extremely popular mystic in the early 1920s. He could answer almost any question from personal issues to national politics while in a trance. In 1925, Cayce began cautioning his clients that 1929 will bring the biggest economic catastrophe in America, leading to depression. Some of his clients heeded to the warnings and withdrew their money. When the predicted time came, the New York Stock Exchange crashed, plunging 13 million people to unemployment. The stock prices didn't get normal until 1954. Cayce's prophecies did not just end there. In 1938, he predicted that the archaeologists shall make a discovery in the sea water near Bimini in the Bahamas which would represent the rising of Atlantis. Surprisingly, in 1968, the Bimini Road was uncovered and a mysterious underwater formation of rocks was found which people regard as the lost city of Atlantis. Cayce even predicted his death, so accurately stating on January 1, 1945 that he shall be buried in 4 more days. True to his words, he died of a stroke on January 3. Spooky. 5. The Internet. American literary icon Mark Twain predicted Internet 90 years before Tim Berners-Lee launched World Wide Web. In 1898, he wrote a short science fiction story called From the London Times in 1904, in which he described a device named telectroscope which was connected with the telephonic systems of the world and made the daily doings of the world visible to everybody. He also ominously predicted his own death in his 1909 autobiography, stating that, "I came with the Halley's Comet in 1835. It is coming again next year, and I expect to go with it." He died on the 21st of April 1910, the same day the comet appeared as it appeared on his birth 75 years earlier. 4. The Landing on Moon. Another author whose fiction turned into being eerily true was Jules Verne. He was a 19th-century French novelist who is well known for the classical adventure story, Around the World in 80 Days. In 1865, he wrote a small science fiction story called From the Earth to the Moon, which portrayed humans' first trip to the moon ever. Almost after a century of Jules' visualization, in 1969, the events of his story came very much true when Neil Armstrong made one giant leap for the mankind. Verne's story of a lunar trip isn't the thing which makes his prediction notable, but the similarities between the journey in his book compared Apollo's journey, including the number of astronauts and that both rockets were launched from Florida. However, the weirdest of the coincidences was Verne's description of astronauts feeling weightlessness. At the time he had written the story, even the scientists didn't know that gravity behaves differently in space, so how could he have known? 3. The Cold War. A French political scientist named Alexis de Tocqueville predicted in his 1840 publication, Democracy in America, writing, "There are now 2 great nations in the world which, starting from different points, seem to be advancing toward the same goal. Russians and Anglo-Americans, each seems called by some secret desire of Providence one day to hold in its hands the destinies of half the world." Back when this book was written, America had been independent from Britain for just 60 years and was deeply divided by the Civil War, whereas Russia was under autocratic and hierarchical leadership of the Tsarist regime. In such circumstances, who would have predicted these 2 nations to become superpowers and battling for world supremacy just over a century later? This French political scientist did. Since then, a kind of Cold War between the US and Soviet Union has risen, with each one trying to beat the other in nuclear advancements, weaponry, space technology and, of course, world influence. 2. The Great Fire of London. The prophecies of French apothecary and seer Michel de Nostradamus are legendary, with him being credited for numerous major event predictions which came true even centuries after his death. One of his most famous predictions was the Great Fire of London, which broke out in 1666 and totally mangled the city, burning down the homes of its 90% inhabitants. In his book called Les Prophecies he wrote, "The blood of the just will be lacking in London, burnt up in the fire of 66. Isn't that spine-chilling? It can also be assumed that he predicted the French Revolution 1789, saying, "From the enslaved populace, songs, chants and demands, while princes and lords are held captive in prisons." It very much mirrors how the downtrodden peasant majority rose up and arrested the French aristocracy during the revolt. Nostradamus also discussed headless idiots, which could be in reference to thousands of people executed by the guillotine during the ensuing reign of terror, including King Louis XVI and his wife. 1. Leonardo da Vinci's predictions. Da Vinci was a Renaissance polymath, being a scientist, artist, mathematician, musician, all in one. Da Vinci's notebooks, in which he recorded his thoughts from the mid-1480s till his death in 1519, are littered with designs for inventions and such technologies that are way ahead of his time. We can't be such generous to credit him for those inventions, as his diagrams weren't detailed enough to provide a construction guide. But inventions much like his drawings do exist, such like his design for a tank-like armored vehicle over 400 years before tanks became a reality. He also drew a diagram of an early parachute 3 centuries prior to the first parachute jump. The helicopter, which was not made until 1940s, was also in Da Vinci's sketches, the predecessor to the modern-day flying machines.